It's so great to go to all these places and see such good patriotic people. I think I can't hear me. First of all, one of the great things about Common Core is that we've only got as far as we have in trying to stop Common Core because of the grassroots. Because Melanie Curtis, if some of you know her she was the Republican candidate for State Board of Ed last time. And her and I have been traveling across the state, and that's because of the grassroots people talking to their legislators that we've gotten as far as we have. Now, to explain to you, Common Core was probably started 2 years ago, introducing it into the schools. The testing will not start till a year from September. And we've got it in the budget. Tom McMillan, State Representative Tom McMillan, Rochester Hills, he was the driving force in this. And when we got in the budget that was passed this spring, it said, we negotiated to the wording to say that Common Core and Smarter Tests will not be funded through the Department of Ed until the legislatures votes otherwise. So this summer we're having hearings on Common Core. We've already had one hearing. We have 4. Unfortunately, the chairman picks mostly pro-Common Core people to testify. This next hearing, we had Achieve and Michael Flanagan, the superintendent of the schools. And this next hearing will be on July 30th in the House Office Building from 10 to 12, if anybody wants to come. We are going to have 2 pro and 2 con testifiers. One, Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale, who is against Common Core, and Joy Pullman from the Heartland Institute, who happens to be also a Hillsdale graduate, but in a think tank in Illinois, like something like Mackinac Center. So and then we'll have 2 more hearings and hopefully be able to straighten up the balance. But again, it's grassroots people like you getting on our email list. We email them. They go talk to their legislators. Face-to-face is the best way to do it. So, again, thank you, and we're going to get started. And first of all, I've added this part to and I don't have a slide for it, but the stated goal of Common Core is college and career readiness. But after researching hundreds of hours and looking at who's behind all this, my belief is the goal is social justice, equity. Control is what is being taught in the hands of bureaucrats at a national level, cutting out our parents, local boards, state legislators. Even the Congress did not vote on this. And enrichment of corporations that supply the teaching tools that we all have to buy to do Common Core. Now, like I said, this affects here every area of education. Now, did you really think under the Obama administration that they were just going to take over the car companies and the health care and the autos? No, they're going to get education. It's priority 1, 2009. They started on this. Now, Common Core, I'm going to get you all your terms straight. It's a very complicated subject. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm not very close to this microphone. Okay. There's Common Core state standards, and these are national standards, which they say curriculum's not aligned, but when they buy textbooks aligned with Common Core and they do all these things, it really, and teachers are telling us they have to reorganize their classes even sequentially when things are taught, then I believe that's curriculum. National testing. We signed on to the Smarter Balanced Testing Consortium. There were 2 federally funded testing consortiums with $350 million, and they have 2 federal review teams. So your kids will not be taking MEAP. They will be for math and English language arts. They will be taking a federally funded test. National data banks on students, federally funded statewide longitudinal data systems in 2009 were very much increased the amount of data that was required for that. So race to the top, you hear that word too, that was the grant in 2009 under American Recovery Act. Common Core is the standards and the testing resulting in the curriculum being mandated. Now this is kind of hard to see, but this I'm not going to tell you that politically correct education started in 2009. It's been here a long time. This is a sample, an actual question that was on the MEEP test. I have them in my briefcase. I've had them since then, and how long I've been researching this. In 1999, a new tax proposal for a corporate jet tax was suggested by the president of $250 a flight. And then the kids were asked, what is the social goal? And that would be equity. And what is the financial goal is redistribution of resources. So you know, if and this was a sample question too, so this had to be discussed with your kids if you have kids in their 20s and 30s. So there's the proof of the questions. The other question from that test was women in combat. Give your opinion, even though at that time it was illegal to test attitudes, values, and beliefs. It was the legislature passed that. This test was on the question was on the MEEP. It was also on the California test of the same thing too. So we think a lot of people were doing national things a long time. Women in combat. What is your opinion of women in combat? They actually asked the kids. Now, if you got a census question and asked that, you wouldn't probably answer it, but your kids had to. And they had to use the rubrics. The rubrics said that if you use the data provided, you get a better answer. So all the data shows you should have women in combat. So I guess our smart kids said yes and wrote their essay. Now, how come we didn't know about this Common Core, even though it started out in 2009? That's because it was unknown by design. Our legislators have the right to control education in the Michigan Constitution. But in 2010, the State Board of Ed wrote a letter to leadership, Bishop, Kuipers, and the two Democrats, and a simple letter mentioning they're going to Common Core standards, giving them 20 days to respond, and there was nothing. They didn't know what this was about, and I think it kind of just got lost on the staff's desk. Common Core was not voted on by Congress. Our legislators across the state, it was all done by administration during the summer when most legislators were not in. How did they give up? State Board of Ed gave up our sovereign right of our state legislature to control education, not just the local schools. Race to the Top was a $4.35 billion federal initiative in the stimulus package, and the states didn't have much money, so they applied for this Race to the Top grant. State boards of ed did. Legislature didn't know anything about it. So, in 3 different ways, in 2009, they signed a memo of understanding, and the Michigan State Board of Ed approved an application for Race to the Top, agreeing to Common Core. There was no Common Core in existence, but they agreed to it. To get the application made you agree to do Common Core. Final approval was June 2010, just a few days after the June 15th standards were finalized. The different days, it's within a few days. Also in 2010, State Board of Ed signed on to the federally funded and reviewed testing called the Smarter Balance, like I explained to you. It's a consortium of 26 states with a pseudo choice. You had Park or Smarter, but all were funded by the feds. So this test is based on Common Core. They also agreed to do that. So this test will test the Common Core. And in winter 2012, just recently, the State Board of Ed also applied for and received a No Child Left Behind waiver, where they promised to implement Common Core. Only 2 states had the nerve to not do Common Core and they got the waiver anyway, but our State Board of Ed went along. Common Core state standards are education content and process standards. It's not by 4th grade you need to know your multiplication tables. It's much more detailed. It's how to teach. It's the process and skills, not the knowledge and facts. So for example, some people will say, and a lot of schools are changing to the fuzzy math because they say that the standards lead you to that, and it doesn't tell you have to use a standard algorithm till like 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that. So in other words, the fuzzy math, are you familiar with that? Chicago math, everyday math, your kids all must have had it. Troy schools had it from the 90s. And so the way the tests are written so that you have to know how to do a multiplication table, a multiplication in 4 different ways, or adding double digit 4 different ways. So the kids have to learn this confusing math. They were never field tested. They're not internationally benchmarked, despite what they say. Professor Driscoll from the University of Pennsylvania back in 2010 found that we only have less than 20% matching to the high countries like Finland, as all those type of countries, the Asian countries. Very little, because we have process standards of how to do things, not knowledge and content like those countries do. We adopted math and English language arts, but that's English language arts in history, social studies, science, and technical. So here we can go and ask some questions on those other more controversial areas. We would think they're controversial, but that way. Science, next generation science standards will be adopted this summer. Our state was one of the lead designers. If we don't stop them every time they have a hearing on them, we send a lot of people, and they've kind of been backing down. But in other states, they've approved them. And social studies and art, sex ed is in the wings. But again, we didn't get any of this race at top money, and we're doing all this work that you're seeing in your schools. We didn't win a grant. Very few states won money. Charters are required, so I would think, when we didn't win the money, they just said, let's just stay where we're at, and we can't afford this. Charters are required to use Common Core since they're public schools. And parochial and private schools are teaching Common Core because there is a very much knowledge that the ACT and the SAT are going to be aligned to Common Core very soon. Homeschoolers take those tests too, so they'll have to make sure they are re-educating their kids before they take these tests. Common Core standards are copyrighted to the NGOs, National Government Association, and to Chief School State Officer. So we can't change, they're copyrighted. And half of the funding for their development came from taxpayer money, mostly federal money, through those NGOs, National Government Association. Assessments are aligned to the standards and are developed by Pearson, which is the big book owner of most of the textbooks in this country, and other education materials are an English company. Achieve and are privately owned and not accessible. In other words, we don't know what the debate was, what the minutes were from when the people who were on the different committees developing the standards. Pearson's chief education advisor, Sir Michael Barber, you can look him up. He ruined the English education system, and now he's here. The standards cannot be changed. You can add 15%, but not in. We're not talking about adding 15% every grade. We're saying totally. So in some states, since cursive is not in Common Core, some legislators in other states are adding Common Core, but there won't be that much incentive for some of these additional things to be added because they won't be on the Common Core test. Because remember, the test only is a national test, and it only tests the things in Common Core. So our teachers are now also being tied their wages to passing this test, and what will happen is they really won't, and I don't blame them, have an incentive to teach anything but what's in Common Core. Unfortunately, many of our charter school organizations are promoting Common Core, and we've figured out why. This is from their website, and you can the national website, because they got Bill Gates money. I'll explain to that later. And Joyce Foundation, if you're Glenn Beck fans, you can remember Joyce Foundation from Chicago. Common Core. So I'm trying to brief you here. We have the standards. And the assessments to tie together. You're going to have a curriculum to pass the test. You got to teach what's on the test. And then you have your longitudinal data systems, which will result in a national education. People will tell you Common Core is state-led, but it's really special interest, federally incentivized. In fall 2009, President Obama, and I remember my state rep telling me this, he threatened to take away Title I money if legislation and Common Core were not implemented, although legislation that really didn't say go for Common Core, but it tied teacher salaries to tests and that kind of thing. He had it all figured out ahead. And the Federal Department of Ed required Common Core to receive a No Child Left Behind waiver, another federal mandate that led you to believe they were behind it. And President Obama, in his 2013 State of the Union address, he said, 4 years ago, we started Race to the Top, a competition that convinced almost every state to develop a smarter curriculum and higher standards. Now, there's only one, Common Core. Then another thing, U.S. Secretary of Education was speaking at UNESCO, and he said, almost all policymaking and education funding was a state and local responsibility. The Obama administration has sought to fundamentally shift the federal role. I guess I'm not blind. I figured that's Common Core. The House attempted, now right now this is something I've just added because the Congress, the House, just passed the Student Success Act, And it prohibits the federal government from forcing states into adopting Common Core academic standards. Unfortunately, I'm a little afraid it's only for going forward. But I'm not, really great at reading legislation. That's my fear of that. But this is from the Republican Study Committee, this whole paragraph. And what it says is, I don't know if our state legislators can't figure out that it's a federal incentivized program, but our Congress does, because they passed this with this wording. Who else opposes Common Core? The Detroit News did an editorial back in 2010. Republican National Committee did a resolution. I'm hoping that perhaps your board will like to do a resolution against it. I can give them some samples. Romeo Tea Party did. A lot of our Tea Parties, I have about 20 Tea Parties who have done resolutions against Common Core for us to use. Michigan State Committee did. Heritage Institute, AFP, Cato, Eagle Forum, American Principles Project, and more. All those groups that we trust are against Common Core. And Michelle Malkin has great articles on Town Hall. If you would like to read some good articles and summarizing it, George Well, Stanley Kurtz. Texas, Nebraska, and Virginia refused to do Common Core, and former Texas Education Commissioner Robert Scott said the Obama administration is marching toward a federal takeover in the nation's public schools. Why are national standards bad? Because they're unconstitutional, they violate federal law, they take control of education content and standards away from the parents, even Congress. The entire country will suffer for our mistakes. If Common Core has something missing, like we know right now, it doesn't have the conversion of fraction to decimals and decimals to fraction. They missed it because they had so few people on these writing committees that ever wrote standards before. Teachers' unions and other powerful special interest groups are and will control. They've been involved in this. The AFT, MEA, Bill Gates, and all mostly former Clinton Department of Ed employees. 15,000 local boards and 51 state boards are better than one, right? Local control has worked. We don't have such great local control anymore. I will admit it. The state is controlling it. It's very difficult for parents to go to their local school board and get them to change. But removing it even further is just making it worse. Competition is good. If even charters and that do the same Common Core, then have to take the same tests, then that lose competition there. And there's no choice. And there's no evidence that national standards will improve anything. So big countries like Canada and Australia don't have national standards, and they do well on the national testing. Neither does little Belgium. So that's not what's determining whether children are learning. Cost and more bureaucracy. Michigan never got the Race the Top funds, like I said, but this is testing is extensively expensive. The tests will all be online, instant, online answers, even listening questions online. We will have. We've been spending a fortune on teacher professional development. We've bought every school that can afford it is buying new textbooks. You're seeing computers and online. You're seeing a lot of school districts with bonds for technology. That's why they're having to at least have every kid have an iPad or some kind of a instrument that they can carry with them. And this is causing in the rural states, like Kentucky, they were attempting to, we're doing testing, for to seeing if it'll work, and the kids are, some districts are doing that here in Michigan, and Kentucky, they blew the whole bandwidth, the library shut down, everything, because they have to have all these kids taking the test at the same time, and they want all the kids in the country to take this test within 20 days. So it's Oklahoma's already decided not to do this park test. They sent in a park because they have rural places, and just think of Oklahoma is they can't even get the fiber optic lines to the school, so they aren't going to do it. National estimates are 16 to 30 billion from the Pioneer. California's asked for $1 billion extra for their department from their Department of Ed budget. Michigan estimates. I estimate 500 million based on other states who have admitted how much it's going to cost and the number of kids we have in our schools that we've already spent or going to spend that much because we're kind of in the middle. And when we ask the Michigan Department of Ed how much it'll cost, they say the local districts are paying the brunt of this. So an unfunded mandate to our local schools. because the Michigan Department of Ed didn't even do cost studies before they signed on. It was so fast they couldn't have, and they won't show us any. They say there aren't any costs for them. But they forgot you pay the other tax. Progressives, foundations, wrote and promote. Okay, federal intervention in education is illegal. No Child Left Behind had clauses like that. So Obama's friends fronted the idea. The big funder was Bill Gates, and if I have the ability to download YouTube, you can find him where actually he says that their goal is to control a national curriculum. And the employees of all these places I'm talking about, National Governors Association, all these other places, are always interchangeable with the Department of Ed employees. They're jumping back and forth. So we know that they all have the same goal. He donated $200 million that we can find to push Common Core. Jeb Bush is Chief for Change. You will see Jeb Bush is for Common Core. He got Gates money, Fordham Foundation Gates money, Carnegie Corporation, the National PTA, National Charter Groups, and the two writers of National Governors Association and Chief School State Officers also got money from Bill Gates. He really wants this. You can go do a YouTube search for Bill Gates and Common Core, and you will find him just speaking everywhere how he wants everyone in the country to have the same. He coordinated, here's the writers, our National Governors Association, which is a trade association. Governors, not all governors belong to it. Even Gates gave money to them, and 80% of their department that wrote it got federal funding in 2010. Other corporations pushing it, Intel, GE, State Farm, Hewlett Foundation, the funding all these other organizations to push it. Most experts that you will find that are at our hearings here in Lansing have ties and got funding from Gates, like Achieve, those kinds of groups. David Coleman is a lead writer of Common Core and now president of the College Board that writes SAT. We have all kinds of ties to him with Ayers and Annenberg and Gates and that. His GROW networks were bought by the Chicago Public Schools 15 years ago, and you can see it didn't work. Achieve is, but it made money for him. Achieve is in charge. Now, Achieve, I've known about Achieve since '96 when they were formed to help President Clinton enforce outcome-based education and school to work onto the states. And he is the current president, is Michael Cohen, who was a former, the entire Clinton administrations. He was as Assistant Secretary of Education. Linda Darling Hammond was also a tech advisor. She's the friend of Bill Ayers, and he wanted her to be the Secretary of Education, but Obama picked Arne Duncan. Pearson Publishing, Gates Microsoft, they'll make a lot of money, and they're involved in writing this. AFT and the teachers' unions all were in writing and in training for it. They had another, Mark Tucker, Hillary's education guru, National Center Education and Economy, helped write it, and the Aspen Institute. There's just more. Everybody's making money here. So how will the government know if Common Core works? Well, we got to do a test. And like I said to you, remember, MEP is not a test. It's the word A in the MEP is assessment, and that means they assess the whole child, not just academics. The U.S. Department of Ed allotted $350 million, like I explained before, of the economic stimulus money to devise Common Core tests as part of the push for Common Core standards. This violates federal law. The Pioneer Institute has a big paper on that. So the Michigan Department of Ed signed us into this contract with the federally funded testing, which now just a year ago we found out has 2 federally appointed review teams to validate the questions. Testing will be adaptive, interactive, online, very expensive hardware bandwidth. SMART is writing in the contract they agreed, but they're just really behind. So right now they're only doing year-end testing. But they're doing what they call formative testing too, which it says eventually be weekly and monthly, not just the now year-end testing. And there's some very strange wording in the contract that's called psychometric testing. Now, it's defined as psychological and personality testing. What we believe the data they want to do that for is because you'll see that the goal has been for a long time, but it's hyped up again, just like healthcare, the government control, and they're all administrations, but then we got to this one, wow. And so what we're seeing is they want to tie education to the labor market and see what you're like or how they taught you and how you, did you end up on welfare, successful, whatever. Sometimes data is not, it's too much. You have to balance with privacy. So the Smarter Agreement also mandates sending student-level data, what they get, the results of the test to the Department of Ed. Now our state claims no one will know who the people are because they're going to have their own number, not their social security number, and that number will be kept in Lansing. Any state, right. So here's how we got all this big data system. Now I've known since Engler. Engler wanted this data system started, and at the time the Republican legislature said no way, so he executive ordered it, called CEPI, CEPI. But what happened in the American Competes Act is that if you wanted to get your money again, and they even increased it, of course, because of the huge amount of money that the American Competes Act, American Recovery Act had, every state was told they had to buy an identical data system with each identical points if they wanted their money. And so they all did, because it was triple the amount of money they normally got. And every state had to buy an identical system, and this group funded called the National Data Quality Campaign monitors the state to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do, or otherwise they won't get their money next year. So it wants student-level enrollment, demographics program, everything from preschool to end of college. There's a lot of thing here, and I'm getting behind, so I'm going to tell you, actually, we have this longitudinal data system. They admit that we track a lot of things about our kids there. 400 different personally identifiable characteristics but Lansing claims we don't give it to the feds. Okay, but every state has this, and we're just waiting for the next step. If you want to know what that looks like, go to the Department of Ed website, federal, and call the National Education Data Model, and there you'll find these data. So the Labor Department in Michigan has what's called the Workforce Data Quality Initiative. That's in 12 states, and they're, again, tracking people, mental health, public assistance, those things. So the goal of education from the Fed's viewpoint is workforce training. Now, I took this right off of our Michigan CEPI, the Data Collection Department. It says these are the goals from a national perspective. So you know they're listening to what the feds are telling them. Interconnect P through 12, post-secondary, and workforce data. I don't have to tell you. They tell you right here. Provide data to researchers and other experts. All these things I put in red are what's right from their website. 12 essential elements, unique statewide student identifiers so that they can keep it, but no one else knows who you are. But a lot of people have said you don't need the number, your social security number, to figure out who you are. Yearly test records of individual students will get collect, transcript information, remedial courses, and other information deemed necessary. What happened in December 2011, the Obama administration under Arne Duncan changed the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. They revised it so that they can release student data to non-academic persons' records. And there's more changing. They allow other agencies to share students' personal information with practically any government agency or even a private company as long as it says it's an education program. So, and I have some quotes here more how we're tying this to the labor market. Hopefully one day we can look a child in the eye at the age of 8 or 9 and say you're on track to be accepted in a competitive university. Bill Gates, again, is in here. Framework for Human Capital Data Development. This one actually has social security numbers of hundreds of millions of kids. It was reported in Reuters, so it's not something that I dreamed up. And luckily, our state's not in it, but a lot of states are in this. And again, Arne, the education newsletter said, while there's still much work to be done in linking K through 12 and post-secondary records, states also should be planning now for how to incorporate workforce data into their longitudinal data systems. So in summary, the progressives had control of our kids, what they're taught, for a long time. And now the federal government and the liberal foundations are all tied together in Common Core. And we have a lot of threats to our data privacy. So we need to find someone who has a good legislator who will help introduce more privacy laws. So 3 states have paused it. Michigan is one. We have at least 17 states with anti-Common Core legislation. We're not alone. Education Insiders and MEA Magazine both think the cost is too high. So we need to do the things on your flyer. I have some things. Call them and thank them for that pause because they voted for it. It was in the budget. And to tell you truly that there were 6 Republican legislators in the House that pledged that they would tell the leadership that they would not vote for the budget if this language to at least put a pause on Common Core wasn't in there. And because we're so close now, Democrats and Republicans, only a few votes in the House, that worked. But it's not going to work forever. And there's a lot of rich guys talking to, just like with health care. So we need to pause it permanently by getting these people who are on your flyer to vote, when the hearings are done, to vote to say to the legislature as a whole that we do not want Common Core and smarter tests. And and also work on your own legislator, explain this to him, and tell him that you don't want it either. So even if the committee recommends to the legislature as a whole, we would still have a chance with your legislators' vote to stop Common Core and smarter. So I appreciate you inviting me. Hopefully I've got it across.